All right. Good evening, everyone. To all the listeners out there in Radio Land. This is the encouraging word, May 2nd, 2024. I'm on the front porch and it's twilight and it's just beautiful out here. This is where I need to be. I was asked to comment on why someone would want to smoke marijuana if they're a believer. And I think that's a good question. The better question is, does that interfere with your spiritual nature that you have with God if you're high at the same time? And of course, the answer is yes. And God specifically addresses this in the book of Galatians. But let me just summarize the nature of the Holy Spirit and what a distraction is and how we get there in life. Outside influences always have distract people. The word distraction comes from the Latin word means dis, which means apart, and trahere, Traher, which means to drag. So the word distraction means something that drags you away from your task. You want to do something, you're fixed on it, you have a goal of doing it, but guess what? You get dragged away from it, pulled away. That's what a distraction is. These outside influences can interrupt our continuity of our spiritual communication with God. So let me give you some examples. Samson, in the Old Testament, Samson was a Nazarene. He was known, the Nazarenes were never allowed to cut their hair. And I don't know why, it's just one of those customs that they did. And so his mother set him aside as a man of God when he was young. But Samson and his parents at the time, the parents were the matchmakers, they found him a great woman to marry, another Jewish woman. And Samson had his eyes on someone else. Delilah was from another tribe, another foreign nation that was living in Israel at the time, and he wanted Delilah, and he got her, and he pursued her, and she was evil and she was wicked, and his parents warned him, and he refused to listen to his father, and she ended up bringing him down. He was distracted from his godly duties because of a woman, and that was Delilah. She ended up bringing him to his death. And that's an example of someone that is not doing drugs and alcohol who can get distracted by a woman. So imagine if you were on drugs or alcohol, and imagine how much more easier it would be to be distracted by something else, such as a woman. David, King David, the youngest son of Jesse, ended up doing the same thing. He wasn't a druggie. He wasn't known to be a consumer of alcohol to the point where it got him drunk, but he succumbed to temptation with Bathsheba, and the two of them had a child together. That child lived a week and then he died. He had a second son, that was Solomon. Then he went on to have other sons and daughters, and he was plagued with problems as a result of his choice of disobeying God. God forgave him, but it ended up bringing him down. He lost a son or two and a daughter. So, going on, look at Eve. Eve lived in utopia with Adam, and she had everything she wanted, and she got distracted. So imagine the difficulty of living in a world with all of these distractions and how easy it is if you're under the influence of alcohol or drugs. You must remember that as a born-again believer, as a Christian, we are a three-part person. We are body, soul, and spirit. We have a body. You have a body whether you're dead or alive. You got a body. You have a soul. You have a soul as long as you are alive. Your soul is your breath life. In Genesis, God said he formed Adam out of the dust of the ground, and I have a vision of God on his knees on a beach forming Adam, just like we do on the beach when we make sandcastles. And when he was done, he leaned over and breathed into the nostrils of Adam, and Adam became a living soul, right? And in Genesis 1, God said, let Jesus Christ, let the Holy Spirit, let God make man under our image and our likeness. Doesn't mean our physique, it means his nature is spirit. John 4:24 says God is spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. So we are a three-part person. If we're under the influence of drugs or alcohol, they not only affect our body, because we become intoxicated and we say and do foolish things, and they affect our soul because we end up acting like silly and like an ass sometimes. But they totally interfere and cut off the Spirit of God, who is trying to communicate with the Holy Spirit that's in us. John 3:3 says that when we are born of the Spirit, when we are born again, we are given the Holy Spirit. That is the process of being born again. That is what John and Nicodemus, or excuse me, Jesus and Nicodemus spoke about in John chapter 3. In 1 Corinthians 3:16, Paul reminds us, he says, don't you know that you are the temple of the God, and the Spirit of God dwells inside of you? He's talking about us as Christians, as three-part persons. He's saying the Spirit of God that is given you dwells within you. We have the Spirit of God in us. That is our third part. That is body, soul, and that is our spirit. Why then would we want marijuana or THC or alcohol to repeatedly influence our spiritual communication with God? Spirit is something you cannot see, so God communicates with us spiritually through our thoughts and through our spirit. We believe there are thoughts, but they are actually spiritual inputs coming from him. Our transmission lines, our spiritual transmission lines get crossed. Our spiritual radar, our ability to discern when we walk into a place right and wrong and good, where radar is cut off. It's been hacked. And then we get distracted. We get drug away. We get drug away from our task set before us. Let me read for you this, and I'm going to end in Galatians chapter 5. Galatians 5:16 talks about, it says this, it says, I say then, walk in the Spirit, or another way of saying, live your life. Consider, live your life. Walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the desires of the flesh or the desires of the world. I'm sure that's easy to do, isn't it? Walk in the Spirit. If you're walking in the Spirit, you cannot fulfill the lust of the flesh. This goes back to what Jesus says in Matthew. No man can have two masters, for he'll learn to love one and hate the other. Another way of thinking about that parable is that no man can follow two sets of directions. No woman can follow two sets of directions. Verse 17 says, for the flesh lusts after the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary one to another, so that you cannot do the things that you wanted to. Why? Because you're distracted. But in verse 19 he says, now these are the works of the flesh. These are the things, the desires of the body that we get distracted and we get dragged away into doing when we have a task before us. They are adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness. That means just utter promiscuity, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, which are spiritual lies, envyings. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Remember that one? Envyings, murders, drunkenness, revelings. List these things. Now, the one that I want to bring to your attention is witchcraft in verse 19. This is the work of the flesh. This is something that we're drawn away from our task with. The word witchcraft in the King James is the Greek word pharmakia. That's where we get the word pharmacy. What he is saying here is that drugs will disturb your spiritual continuity and you will be dragged away from completing the task which sets before you. So in conclusion, you should not be smoking marijuana. And of course, if you don't do that, but you drink every day to the point to where you're influenced and make a fool of yourself and open your mouth, you need not be drinking anyway, to that extent. Don't smoke marijuana. When you do, you think you get all these great ideas and formulations and ideas of greatness and inventions and how to organize your life and your apartment, and then what happens is that 4 or 5 hours later, when you're down because you ate a bunch of junk, because you had the munchies, and you look around and you started 50 projects, none of them are done, none of them will be done, and then you've wasted your time and you haven't gotten anything done, and you've wasted a day in your life when the Holy Spirit, when God was trying to communicate with you and the transmission lines were severed, no contact. The godly Wi-Fi was down. So with that in mind, listen up, stay away, do the right thing.